Okay. Hello everyone, thank you for turning up in the middle of your day. My name is Rhiannon Lloyd and I teach currently in the GSM. Just to give you background in case you don't know me, I've been in Auckland now for 2.5 years. I began in Cardiff University where I did my PhD and did some teaching over there. I've been in the University of Auckland for those 2 and a bit years, and I've taught across the Management International Business Department, also the Graduate School of Management, and I do a bit of part-time research fellow work at the New Zealand Leadership Institute as well. At the moment in the graduate school, I teach a consultancy paper. So I send students off into companies to do company placements and to do a bit of applied business research, and I supervise their report writing and so on. And that tends to be very small classes. So at the moment I'm teaching classes of say 14, somewhere between 5 and 14. But the year before and the year before that and the year before that one as well, I was taking classes of around 200 and 300. And so this lecture really speaks to those size classes rather than the 5 to 14 kind of size. So my initial, I suppose, area of expertise is organizational behavior. Critical management theory, but I've also taught on strategy. I run at the moment for the GSM a course which has international business and marketing students. So I've taught across quite a few different disciplines, but you'll probably see my organizational behavior influences and certainly social constructionism coming through in the way I talk about teaching and pedagogy and so on. So that should give you a bit of a background to why I see things the way I do. Okay, so first then, why this subject? Well, I get asked a lot, what do you do? And I say, well, I do teaching in universities, I've done lecturing. And the first thing they say is, oh, well, you probably won't be doing that for much longer. I say, well, you know, why is that? Oh, well, the internet. Okay. What about the internet? Well, the internet will do what you do. So you can just stay at home, right? And just record videos on YouTube. And I get a bit upset about that, and I say, usually quickly in reaction, oh, I hope not. I hope not. And then I sat back and thought, why do I hope not? What's wrong with that? Why would that be a problem? And I wonder whether it's selfish. Am I just resistant to change? Do I just not like the idea of something changing? Is it because I don't like the sound of my own voice on video recordings and I wouldn't want to watch myself on YouTube? You know, what is it that I don't like? And I was thinking, well, initially it seems quite selfish, but actually I think there's a lot of value in lectures. I think there's something unique about bringing a couple of hundred or more people together in one space. So I think there's something really valuable about that lecturing space, that collectivity of people who are interested in something. But at the same time, there's also problems with it, and I think it's outdated. So I hope that our teaching and our lecturing doesn't go online, because I think there's something pretty special about bringing 300 people together in a room to talk about something. But then I realized that that's not what we do, or that we have a tendency not to do that. We have a tendency to bring 200, 300, 400 people in a room and then talk to them. And so maybe there's something that we could be doing differently. So when somebody says, oh, won't that all be online? I can say no, and here are the reasons why. So that kind of set this up. So today I want to kind of help myself answer the question, should we be doing lectures? And I'm going to cover a little bit of the bad. Then I want to sort of cover the good, because I think there is good. What I think maybe a solution might be, and I'm only just starting to play with this idea. So in no way do I think I have all the answers. And then I'm going to share some techniques that I've used and built into my lectures. So in the final half, I've pulled slides from my classes just to show what I do, and then I'd love a discussion about maybe what you do and what we should do or what we could do. So I was just thinking about a way to outline what I was covering, and I guess this outlines it for me. So I think we need to challenge the traditional norms of the lecture, which when reenacted time after time in these lecture contexts, reinforce ways of behaving and learning which present the audience as passive and as empty vessels with nothing to offer themselves. You know, they're empty and we fill them with what we're saying. But I think that's outdated. I think these outdated behavioral and relational norms, because remember there's a norm about the relationship between you and your students embedded within this, do not exploit the unique nature of the lecture, which I see as a collection of diverse, knowledgeable, and interested people who actively want to learn something. So with this in mind then, I went and I searched for things about lectures. And here's a quote from the Times Higher Education, which is particularly scathing. More than 700 studies have confirmed that lectures are less effective than a wide range of methods for achieving almost every educational goal you can think of. For some educational goals, no alternative has ever been discovered that is less effective than lecturing. In some cases, no teaching at all. You know, that hurts. Very intelligent academics and researchers leave their brains behind. This is from The Guardian, when defending what has become lazy and damaging pedagogy of the face-to-face lecture. And imagine if a movie was shown only once, or your local newspaper was read out just once a day. That's face-to-face lectures for you. It's that stupid. So I have a few issues with this. Read out, as if we go into lectures and just read out something. I think that's a bit problematic. Face-to-face, is it really face-to-face? And then obviously the US Department of Education, you might have heard of this study, has conducted its own research and found there is no difference in being lectured at in a classroom versus through a computer screen at home. Now, and that's really rationalizing and justifying this move to internet-based teaching. But lectured at. So we read at, we lecture at, and we just do that face-to-face? No, we don't. I really don't think we do. So I was, really? Really, is this what we do? And so I think it's about face-to-faces. And I don't think we just read at. I don't think we just lecture at. I think what we have in front of us, that gathering of a couple of hundred people, is unique. It's a unique group experience that these students may never get again. You know, how many other times in your life do you sit in a room with 300 people to learn something over and over again, with somebody who's an expert in that topic right in front of you? I also think that examples from peers can be more salient. So this was quite a steep learning curve for me, because I came to New Zealand from the UK, and I like to use examples in my teaching, and I was giving examples and everyone was staring at me blankly. My examples weren't resonating because they were UK examples, so I started leaning on my students to make examples up for me. So I'd give them content and I'd say, does anyone have an example of where that content might work? And their examples were so much better than mine. But what else happened was that other people in the room would turn around to them and say, oh, that happened to me. That happened to me, but slightly differently. Here's how it happened to me. And then somebody would say, well, that didn't quite happen, and a conversation would just sprout. So I stopped giving my own examples and decided to leave it to them. They seemed to be better at it. They also know a huge amount. They're not empty vessels. They're not void of any knowledge or experience. Yes, they may be 18, 19, 20, whatever, but they've still done a lot and they still know a lot. So surely then we want them to talk. And again, their variety of perspectives can be challenging. They can think things that you don't think. They can challenge you and each other. So actually asking them to say something which maybe could be considered, somehow conflicting or contested could be really useful. So getting them to talk to each other and challenge each other in that way. And it also reinforces to them that not everyone in the room is the same as them. Because I find there's a tendency for students to, I've had a few students who go, well, I think I'm speaking on behalf of the class when I say. So, well, are you? Are you speaking on behalf of the class when you say that? What makes you think that? Is it because the rest of the class haven't spoken? So I think there's a lot to be said for using discussion within that lecture context, for leveraging and exploiting the expertise and knowledge of that collective whole that sits in front of you. And therefore, this isn't possible if we uncritically reproduce the traditional lecture blueprints over and over and over again. So face-to-faces. So based on this, I thought, well, how am I going to take all of this kind of thought that I'm having and put it into some kind of structure that I can use when I'm designing courses? And this is kind of what I came up with. The first thing, and this is going to be the structure for the following slides as well. So the first thing I think we need to do is decouple the lecturing, which is kind of, oh, you're lecturing at me. It's seen as a bit of a monologue. and there's power relations within that monologue. And decouple that from the lecture space itself, so the collective space in which people were within. And if we start to do that and decouple the monologue from the lecturing space, I think we can sort of flatten the hierarchy and share the responsibility for learning. And I'll talk a little bit about what I mean by that. But that's really talking to the need for equality in the classroom, so people feel like what they're saying is as valid as what you're saying. If we can do that, then we can start encouraging conversation and encouraging student voice, and ultimately get a little bit closer towards this co-creation of content within the classroom. So the first thing then, decouple lecturing from the lecture. So I think this needs to be done at the blueprint level, and what I mean by that is not after the content. Not, oh, I've filled 15 slides, now I need to go back and make sure that they are somehow discussive. I'm going to add some questions in wherever I can. But actually build this type of discussive content as we build the course design. So that's what I mean by blueprint level. I'm today going to be talking about lectures. I know, of course, that you can do this through course design. So there's flipped classroom styles. I've put some course codes on here if anybody wants to look up the course outlines for these types of setups. So flipped classroom styles like Business 101 and 102. We can't always do that. It takes a lot of resources, it takes a lot of hours. If I have a class of 300 and I want to turn it into a flipped classroom, I have 3 streams of 100 students, each of those is 2 hours. My teaching time goes from 2 hours to 6 hours, just like that. So it gets quite difficult to turn every course into a flipped classroom. You can also build oral contributions into assessments, which is what Business 304 does. Peter Smith runs that and designed that. And if you build oral contributions into assessments, essentially what you're doing is, I don't want to say forcing, but I'm going to say forcing students to talk to you, and when they talk to you, you sort of mark their contribution. How logical is it? Is it showing what it needs to show in order to pass the rubric of the assessment and so on? But you can't always do that either, because that requires resources. It requires case studies, it requires all sorts of things to make that work. And then of course there's simulations. But I'm not talking about course design, I'm talking about lectures. So I don't feel like we can turn every single lecture into one of these course designs. I'm sure there's more options. But I think if we're going to turn a lecture into something which resembles the kind of thing that I want it to resemble, then we need to have a variation in delivery. I think we need to constantly put different hats on. We're a teacher, we're a facilitator, we're a teacher, we're a facilitator, as we're bringing in discussions, activities, games, and whatnot. And these techniques that we're going to use to try and get students to talk to us and create content. So that's decoupling lecturing from the lecture. Once we've done that, I think we need to flatten this hierarchy and share responsibility. I often feel like this guy, and this is a responsibility on my students' learning. You know, they put their learning and their, I suppose, their course outcome on my shoulders. If they get an A, it's not because of them, it's because of me. If they don't get an A, it's not because of them, it's because of me. Because I haven't given the content right. You know, and they don't take responsibility for their own learning. So that's one reason why I want to share responsibility, because this elephant's a bit too heavy for me. But I also want them to feel proactive and to feel in control. I want them to have a sense of control over their learning. So this is kind of what I do. I try and set out expectations for social exchange really, really early on in the first class. And I try and reduce social distance between the taught and the teacher. So I've got some questions for you now. In terms of setting out expectations for social exchange early, how might we do that?
Using analogies to illustrate what the relationship between the teacher and the taught is?
Yes, yeah, I think so. So making that dynamic really clear and then challenging it. Yeah, through analogies. Great, Peter?
I'd coach a few students to do it beforehand.
Yeah?
And then let them do it.
How would you do that? How would you choose which students?
Just
grab them.
just picking one, tell them they're great and tell them what I want them to do.
Okay. Yeah, so you choose some specific people, you tell them your expectations, and then they start the process?
Yeah, okay. I get them to model it.
Yeah, yeah, I'm going to come back to that as well, the modelling. Great. Any other ideas? Yeah? Sorry?
Learning contracts
Yeah.
at school.
So what might they look like?
Well, right at the beginning of the course or the beginning of the year, the students and the teacher together would discuss what their expectations are, each, the teacher and the learners, what they hope to get out of it, what the goals are, and they agree to certain behaviours, certain things that they're going to do, and they sign it, and they keep the contract visible throughout. Is that the sort of thing?
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, that would work. That sounds great. Any other ideas? Yeah?
I don't know if this is answering your question, but in a tutorial setting, I kind of put the responsibility on them to prepare adequately. And I'm like, you're going to present back to the rest of the class, and if you haven't prepared, I'm not going to go through that question.
Mm-hmm.
And so I said that in the first lecture, or first tutorial, should I say, and they all seem to be preparing their tutorials. So
I think that there's,
most of them.
there seems to be an overall theme as well, which is being really explicit.
Yeah.
You know, very much saying this is exactly what I expect of you, and whether getting them to kind of contractually oblige to that, or just teasing it out and getting individual people to try and start the motion of sharing within that space. But it's that pulling out and making it very, very clear that the expectation is that you will talk to me. I will talk to you, but I want you to talk to me too. And then reducing social distance. So we've got this expectation now that you're going to talk to me. How are we going to reduce the social distance and kind of try and improve the equality between us and the learners? Any ideas on that?
Well, I've seen lecturers rolling up and down in huge lecture theatres with the mic and after group work, giving this to different students, or asking them to prepare something in group work and then giving them the mic to speak, so the lecturer doesn't stay on the front a couple of times.
So you
comes up to the back sometimes and it's then go down the front, all that sort of actual moving.
Yeah, and that's challenging the norms as well, isn't it? It's challenging that power relation by saying you go up front and you do the talking and I'll stay back here. So using that space to kind of say we're not going to fit the norms of this space. I'm going to challenge those. That's really interesting. What else could we do? Yes, Ruth.
I think it's also reinforcing whatever they say. So if they make a contribution, encouraging that and taking a role of more of a facilitator, demonstrating the links to the other subjects that other people have mentioned or that you've mentioned yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, almost facilitating sort of networking of ideas within that audience. Yeah. Any other way? Yes, Andrew.
Probably humanizing yourself, sharing a bit about who you are, things like that, self-deprecating humor.
Yeah.
You're not the almighty Andrew up front.
Yeah. The almighty Andrew.
Down the pub.
Yeah, and we're going to come back to that later as well, yeah. Yeah, there's also, I was Googling, did a lot of Googling for this. And there was some people who use GTAs, so they use students who have previously done the course and bring them into the class. So those GTAs can sort of be your little friendly minions that go out and make everyone like you. Yeah, I mean anything really that sort of says I'm not the fount of all knowledge. You know, you can talk to me and we can discuss things. I'm not going to tell you that you're wrong. But I mean, the idea is that you're trying to discourage passivity and share the responsibility of learning throughout the class. And within this context, then, you're hoping that your students will find their voices. That they'll find their voices somehow. So how do we encourage voice? Well, the challenge for me, as I saw it, was getting people to talk in front of groups, in front of their peers. There's a lot of peers in a room of 300 people. How do you get them to talk? And so there are a couple of reasons why students might choose not to participate. I'm sure there's way more than these three. But these three probably resonate most with my experience. And the first one is, and I think this relates to what Andrew said, instructors as the fountain of knowledge. They're the fount of knowledge. So why would I talk when actually I'm here to listen to this person tell me everything that's in their brain? I want their brain to be my brain. when they talk, I'm essentially downloading what they know into my head. And so I think we need to challenge that, maybe through making it clear that what we're doing is sharing contestable knowledge, that we're not giving the one truth, that what we think is not the definite, and that there are lots of other ways to view something. That we don't know everything, we're not omnipotent, we're not gods, we're not Andrew up at the front. We have some humility, we have some modesty, and we're not all that. So challenging that initially. Also, I suppose there's always going to be some element of demeanor and lack of rapport there. Particularly, if you're dressed up in a sharp suit, your microphone is on too high and you're standing at the front behind something that creates a clear boundary between you and them. You're the other then. Whereas if you do something like what you were talking about, where you go out into the audience and you make it clear that, this is just a room format. It's not how things are. You can move around. As friendly as I try and be, there's always somebody who thinks I'm scary. So I don't know how to overcome this. I try and be the nicest person ever, but it's not in my nature to mother my students, and they always find me a little bit scary. And then overcoming peer judgment. And this is really hard to do when you're at the front and you think that everyone should be talking to you and everyone should be engaged. And maybe they want to be, but they're just too afraid to share what they think. And so this leads me on to the next slide, which is small groups. I guess before I move on, I kind of want to make a distinction here between active engagement and what I call attention engagement. So attention engagement to me is where somebody's looking quiet or a little bit sleepy, and I just throw a shoe at them to wake them up in form of a question that's engagement. That is attention engagement. I'm doing engagement so you will listen to me more. Whereas active engagement is a shift in mindset. I'm doing engagement because I want to hear what you want to say. So I want to make that distinction fairly early, that I'm not trying to get engagement because I want people to listen to more of my genius. I want to get engagement because I want to hear what they have to say. So peer judgment, the one way that I try and deal with this is to put students in small groups within the big group. So I build on small group processing theory and the focus group phenomenon. Has anyone been in a focus group? Can you put your hand up if you've been in a focus group? Yeah, okay. How did that focus group start talking? What kind of got that focus group going?
Usually starts with a question.
Yeah, and what kind of question?
Something that's open and encourages different points of view.
Yeah, and why do you think that's so successful?
It allows people to see an opportunity to contribute.
Yeah. Anyone else? What kind of makes focus groups work? So that's good. So an open question that people feel like they can contribute to, yes?
The kind of shared agenda, agenda that's similar to us.
Yeah, shared purpose, yeah. Good. And why do you think that works?
Because you know why you're there. Yeah, it's why you're there.
But why does it make you happy to talk in a group? Yes. It's expected. Yeah, perhaps you feel that there's an element of people feel the same way that you feel because you have a shared topic. Maybe. Why else might people? Yeah.
There's also an element of anonymity there in the focus group. Everybody else in the group doesn't know who you are. And you're never going to see them again afterwards, so it doesn't matter whether you're in a total fool on yourself.
Yeah? Yeah, there is that, so you can kind of hide behind your anonymity a little bit. Yeah? Why else? Any other reasons?
Well, usually a focus group is cool because you're asking people who know something about something to come and give you feedback. So they're there because their opinion is valued or their experience is valued. They're there to give feedback based on who they are and what they can bring. That's what a real focus group is about.
Yeah. So I'm just kind of thinking about these focus group norms. And I think that's probably important that they need to understand what they're going to talk about before you put them in a group. They need to feel like they have a grasp on the topic before you then say, okay, off you go and work in a group. Some of the interesting things about focus groups is that the small groups develop shared norms around participation. So there's this idea that initially somebody who's a bit less inhibited will share their views. The group as a whole will provide rewards for that. And then that will sort of hopefully create an environment where more people are then willing to try and share, and over time that becomes almost an expected thing to do. Additionally, warm-ups help. So actually having an initial question with small groups, which gets them to do something fun first, before then getting into the real challenging stuff, seems to work quite well, I've found. So warm-up periods increase the enthusiasm for that group work. And additionally, and really importantly, when you put people in a small group, they validate the answers that they might be given. Maybe not initially, maybe not everybody's idea is validated initially within that group, but over time, groups tend to try and come to some agreement. They don't like to have lots of conflicting ideas in one place. They like to work things out so that they agree on something. And when they agree on something as a group, that idea becomes validated within that group. And then they're much more likely to share it with the class because they've decided that they all agree with one another, and that's a really good answer. So small groups within larger groups tend to be really useful at getting people to come to an idea that they're willing to share. But once they're willing to share that, they then need to be reintegrated into the larger group. So that the smaller discussion needs to be built into the larger discussion. So it's not just enough, I don't think, to have a discussion within a small group. You then need to have the discussion with those actors in a much bigger setting to draw those ideas out and to compare and contrast them across groups. So I found this to be a good way to encourage voice initially at the start. Then when a group of 100 people or 200 people get used to each other, you might not need to do this. You know? Once they're used to talking and they find that talking isn't scary and I'm not scary, then they become more willing to talk without this need to kind of give them validation first. And hopefully then, at this point, the students should feel free to answer questions with their own ideas rather than trying to guess yours. They're more willing to share their ideas and be challenged. Maybe this is a few weeks in at this point. And so at this point then, I love ambiguity. I like setting really ambiguous questions and seeing what they do with them. And so open questions, ambiguous challenges followed by debriefs that try and draw out all the different contestable ideas is really useful because students are much more likely to put their own ideas out for tender within that environment. But I mean, I have found that you do need to keep exercises fairly simple. So the audience effect, does anybody know what the audience effect is? No? The audience effect has been shown, well, it's based on research which has shown that people are much better at straightforward tasks when in the presence of an audience. If you give them complexity, they tend to not do so well. So they're better at tasks which are straightforward, which are very clearly laid out. And there's multiple theories about why that is. One is that their attention isn't fully focused on the challenge because they can't help but think about the others. Another one is that they're afraid of judgment, so they don't push themselves and so on. But generally, simpler tasks and more straightforward tasks with very, very clear instructions tend to be done best when there's an audience viewing. So with that all in mind, that's kind of my structure. I wanted to sort of tease out some of the things that I've done in my classes. Feel free at any point to stop me and to judge me and to tell me you think it's dumb. I'm totally fine with that. I can improve it then. So these are some techniques. The first one then, in line with that structure that I gave at the start, is getting students to talk. Once I've got them to talk, I try and ask them for their experiences. And eventually I'm getting to the point where I want them to create a lot of the content themselves. And that takes a lot of energy, by the way. That's not me being lazy. It takes a lot of effort to facilitate the creation of content by your students. So step one, getting them to talk. So I initially try and gauge the expertise in the room at any class. So for example, when I asked you guys who's done a focus group, I take note of who put their hands up, and then you're my experts for the bit on social groups. You know, and so I know that if nobody talks to me, I'll pick on you to start the conversation going. So I've gauged the expertise in the room, and then think, pair, and share is like a mini version of those small groups because people are still validating their own ideas, and that can be an add-on to anything. So if nobody's talking to me when I ask a question, I build in a 2-minute think, pair, and share, Or I say, okay, well, you're not talking to me now. I'll give you 2 minutes and you can talk to me then. I also like to do things which are, you can't really be wrong, you can only give your idea about what you think's going on. So these aren't people sharing their examples or their stories, but they are people who are willing to kind of take a gamble and just share an idea. So it's a bit less scary. And I do this in the form of Google image analysis, word board, media reviews, and quote reviews. So I'm going to pretend that you're in my leadership honors course. And the first thing I might do is say, well, the first thing I do is say, okay, I'm going to show you a Google image search of the word leadership. And what I'd like you to do is look at the results and tell me what you think leadership is based on these results. And we're going to see, or we're going to suggest that these results reflect society's belief in what leadership is, okay? So here's your slide, and I'll give you sort of 30 seconds to decide what you think leadership might be to society based on some empirical research via Google Images. So here you go, 30 seconds. You can talk to the person next to you if you wish. Okay, researchers, what do we think this tells us about leadership? I heard you all talking. Yeah?
It's big and bold,
Why is that?
because there's big and bold letters everywhere.
Big and bold, capitals, the bigger word. Yeah, I would totally agree with that, Peter.
Someone else said one which I thought was really good, and is, if you're a woman, you're out of luck.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, big time. Is that the king or the queen? Is that a king or a queen?
It's a queen.
It's a queen, there we go, there's a woman. Okay, what else?
Separation there.
Sorry?
Separation.
What, in what way?
Well, they're always detached from the group and bigger from the group.
So they're bigger, so they're detached through size. How else are they detached?
There's space there.
They're special, aren't they? Because they're a different colour. They're a much more vibrant colour. They're not boring blue, are they? They're exciting red. And they're bigger. What about the little blue people then?
They're just minions. They're just followers.
Yeah?
They've got no clue without that person at the front.
Oh, they don't. No. Is there anything else about them that strikes you?
All the same.
They're all the same. So they're one blue mass, and the leader is out in front, masculine, large, bold, made very clear. So you see, you can't go too wrong with these kind of exercises, and it only took you 30 seconds to completely deconstruct what we were seeing on the board. 30 seconds is quite an easy time to build into a lecture. You can do this with all sorts of things, by the way. If you type in technology, anything like that, you get some interesting results. And it's usually masculine, and there's usually bold letters. So another thing that I like to do with particularly quiet classes is to give them something like this. So this is in an applied business research course, and I said, okay, well, here are the criteria that I think you need to be a successful interviewer. I want you to pick one and tell me why you think it's important. So I'm going to pick someone, and I'd like you to pick a word on here and tell me why you think it's important to have that quality if you're interviewing someone. Does anybody want to volunteer? They never do. Michelle.
I like the word open. I think it gives you some ability to be able to kind of receive as well as give.
Yeah. Does anybody else think open is important? Yeah. Why do you think it's important? Huh? It's not. Why isn't it important?
Because you don't want to be open, you want to be on task, you want to do the same interview with every person so that all the full results.
Okay, so you're a semi-structured, unstructured interviewer, and you are a structured interviewer. Would you say that would characterize or explain the difference between your views?
Yeah, I followed the advice of the guys at Manager Tools who said,
Stick to your script.
stick to your script.
Yeah. Whereas I think Michelle's talking about a more open, unstructured approach to interviewing. So more qualitative, more quantitative? Would that be fair? I think it would be fair.
I wouldn't frame it that way at all.
No. I would ask you how you'd frame it, but given that we're not doing a lecture on interviewing, I'm going to move on. Another thing I do with those students is give them a video and ask them to tell me what they've learned from that video as well. These are all really short debriefing sessions. You can keep them really short, or you can give them 30 minutes. We could have stayed on that word open for a long time if we wanted to, or I could have said that's enough from you, someone else pick something else. And this is the same kind of thing. What did you learn? And allow them to put their learning in their own words, so they don't just walk away from the video and forget everything, but they actually go, okay, I know I learned this, but how am I going to write down how I learned this? And this is a similar thing too. It's really easy for people who aren't in a class on leadership and aren't in a class on interviews to do any of these things. That's the idea. They're easy to answer. So give them a quote and then say, why did I pick this quote? What's important about this quote? Usually I give them some help and embolden certain areas that I want them to focus on. It's a really quick, easy debrief. Can last a long time, or it can last 30 seconds. So I've got them talking and I'm trying to establish a norm in the classroom. Now I'm pushing them and I want them to share their experiences and examples. So here I actually want stories, I want narratives, I want maybe role playing. I want them to actually probably put something out there that's a bit more vulnerable to judgment and peer judgment. But it's still open. So things like as a group, in small groups, so at this point initially I'll put them in small groups. Each person describe a situation where they have undertaken some form of identity work, and as a group, choose one example to share with the class. So I'm deliberately forcing them to do this social validation within their group. I'm not saying just say stuff. I want you to all contribute, and then I want you to decide among yourself which is the best answer, because they're going to be much more willing to share their favorite answer with the class. So I'm forcing the process that I want. I also did do some role playing with them. So this is an example from a course on, I was looking at diversity. And I got them groups of 6 and split them into 2 teams. And one group was the CEO, and one group was a new employment and equality officer. And they had to write a little script which detailed the exchange between these 2 parties. And they had to be ready to present their exchange to others, and this terrified them. They really didn't want to do this, but there were always a few by the end of the sort of 15 minutes who were really excited and did come up, put microphones on, and they did the role play out in front of the class. This was a few weeks in, though. This took a while to get them, to do that. But I gave them a good debrief. So I gave them this before the class and said that's what we'd be doing. It describes what's expected of them. This is the CEO. This is the employment equality officer. I mean, I set the scene. Look at the pictures. And I set out their task really clearly and what they might want to consider in their task. So what are the vested interests of each actor? What unconscious biases are at play here? And how will each party defend and rationalize their own perspective? So I tried to get them to imagine that there were these different people and how would they actually argue about something. And they were willing to do it. I was a bit nervous at one point, but they actually did come up and they played out. I can take the quote thing a bit further, and actually instead of just saying, why would I pick this quote, put a quote and then ask them, do you think we can get rid of the negatives outlined above? So this one's about diversity. So that this was actually saying that diversity isn't good. So heterogeneity on most any salient social category contributes to increased conflict, reduced communication, and lower performance. So I was telling them why diversity is sometimes seen as bad, and I wanted them to think about ways then that we could overcome these, and then how. So give them the opposing argument and say, okay, based on what I've talked about, what would you use from what I've told you to answer these kind of criticisms of diversity? Stories again, can you think of an example when something has affected you? And what did you do versus what you do now? Any of these kind of questions where they're trying to bring up some kind of story that they've been through. And then even just challenging questions. So how can we change gendered organizations? This one was a really fascinating discussion. There was a lot of different opposing opinions, but they were only willing to kind of share those because the first few weeks we'd done all the other easier stuff, you know. And finally, I guess what I'm trying to do is create some moments within that lecture or course where I can have them pretty much create their own content. Not always, but I'm trying to get to this point. So maybe a full discussion lecture, which is what I did with the critical issues course, where you saw the diversity and the gendered slides from. I actually got them to do a discussion class, which I'll show you in a second. Also, a colleague of mine does submit a slide. So they give them a question at the end, or they give them a puzzle, or maybe they give them the kind of question like this. And then they say, okay, I want you guys to go back and write a slide, and the best person with the best slide gets to present their slide in front of class next week. It's not assessed, but every week somebody does it. Every week somebody does it, and the beginning of the next lecture is 7 minutes where that student presents their slide. So in terms of the full discussion lecture, I'll just kind of show you what that looked like. I had this question, is workplace autonomy a fallacy? This was a question that was set in the midterm, and I told them it would be word for word, this would be one of the 3 questions, definitely, absolutely 100%. And I said they can use the content from any of the previous 4 to 5 lectures to answer that. All of that content is valid to this question. They can focus on one of the lectures. They can try and combine all of them. They can create any answer they want because all the classes before had kind of been orientated around this idea. And within this one lecture, there was no teaching. There were no PowerPoint slides aside from this. The first hour, or the first 40 minutes, they were split into teams of 4, and every team member had to bring a draft essay or a draft plan. I told them over and over again those who didn't wouldn't be allowed to join the teams, and 2 people didn't, and they were asked to sit by themselves in the group of 2. So I stuck to my threats. And each member had a 10-minute slot where they would explain their plan, and it was very likely to be very different from everyone else's. And they would explain it, and then they would get Q&A, and the other members were only allowed to help them with their plan. So each member of that group got 10 minutes, they presented their outline, and the 3 other members were able to contribute to the outline in some way. And the idea, as this was made very clear to them too, you were not allowed to give up your own argument. So you were not there to choose the best plan. You were not there to do that. You were there to improve your plan with the insights and the expertise of others in your group. And they did that. They didn't all converge around one answer. They took the 10 minutes. I was walking around, and I also had 2 GTAs walking around with me. They took their 10 minutes. They made the most of it. The team members gave them valuable insights, and they moved on to the next team member. And in their group, they were also asked to come up with one big question that the group had as a whole, and we discussed that in the second hour. And then if we ran out of time, we also discussed the things that I wanted to discuss too. So there was nothing but talk and discussion and exploration around this mid-semester test question. And when I was marking the exams, they did a really good job, and it was so interesting to be a marker because I wasn't marking the same essay over and over again. I was marking 200 different essays where they'd all come up with their own way of answering. So that was really fun. And it was a situation where they all created their own content. So with that then, in conclusion, it's not a very long conclusion, I think harnessing the collective knowledge of the large group is, in my opinion, how we move forward with the lecture format. And I don't have any specific questions, as you might have already assumed. What do you think? What do you think? Do you have any questions? Do you want to talk about anything?
Look, I agree, Rhiannon. I think, thanks very much. I think it's super important that we don't talk about lecturing. I've done away with the word lecture. I'll just say class. We meet in class, and it just gives me more freedom, and I'm trying to set expectations. But to me, content knowledge can be assumed through different means, but I think what's so important and what we don't talk enough about, I think, is social skills and soft skills, working in a team, and all these sorts of things. And I think the class is the place where we can really develop this sort of
Mm.
stuff. I think there's a place for the internet, you know, to contribute. To
Oh,
some
absolutely, yeah. I don't want to
But
question
no.
the place of the internet.
No, absolutely. But I think I also very firmly believe that there is a place for meeting with 300 like-minded people.
Mm.
Hopefully, most of them being keen and eager, just
Mm.
like us, and then doing something pretty magic in the class. So yeah, I agree.
Excellent. Well, I think there's a challenge there about having the students believe in the value of what other students say, because they can have a tendency to say, well, why I don't want to listen to Fred. I want to listen to Professor, you know, or Doctor. You know, well, why would I listen to my mate when I can just go to the canteen and ask them what they thought afterwards? And so overcoming that, I'm finding a challenge. What is the value of me listening to a peer when they're just going to think what I think? And actually trying to get them to say, no, your peer might not think what you think. Your peer might think something really interesting, and you're not giving them a chance to, you're not listening to them.
I think it's really great. You not just encourage them in engage them in the class, and also encourage the teamwork and team environment learning, which is also encouraged as part of graduate attribute. I think it's really great. And have you also done something kind of online engagement as well? I know you mentioned about flipped classroom. So you're doing, I know class engagement is very important. Anything about online engagement?
Not really. I would admit
Probably somewhere
to...
would be really great to have to
Yeah.
incorporate it, especially on Canvas.
Yeah.
And you may welcome work with your librarian.
Oh.
Actually, librarian from Library and Services.
Yeah, I mean, I've tried to set up discussions before, and they haven't worked so well. I think I probably haven't put as much time as I could have
They're
done into
really
that.
good. They have
Yeah.
a lot of knowledge in that area, and also with learning advisors.
Yeah.
It will work well with you people as well.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah.
How about you deal with like the week 10 lethargy that tends to take over?
My lethargy. Or the
Students,
students.
because I was just in a class which was facilitated, and at the start of the semester everyone was chipper and enthusiastic, and now...
I just keep talking to them, basically. I just keep asking them questions. If they're all looking really kind of down, I get them to stand up and shake it off. But then I only have a class at the moment of 14. So I can force them to do all sorts of things, run around, jump around. With a class of 140, I just keep talking to them. I just keep my own momentum up, and put the responsibility on them. I can't take all the responsibility for their joy, their happiness, their energy levels. I can only take some responsibility for that. So I try not to get down about it too much. Yeah. Anything else? Yeah. Listen.
I think this is a really good example of that kind of ako in Māori, that kind of exchange of knowledge between the learner and the teacher, and between the learners themselves, the students. And the second thing is there is research to support that I've read, educational research, that says you learn 25% yourself of the content, 25% from your peers, and 50% from the lecturer and the content of the lecture or the teacher or whatever. So I think that's a really nice concept to tell the students that some students think you can't learn from them either because they think the same thing or because they may not learn anything from them, but there is deep value, I think, in that exchange of ideas and forming groups like that. So I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, I think having these small, I think someone was mentioning the social skills, those social skills that you get from group work. And I've noticed there's been pushback, especially from stage 3 students, that they don't want assessed team content. But they want to have individualized control over their mark when they get to stage 3. So they're pushing back on teamwork, which I completely understand, because when I was in their shoes, I wanted to have complete control over my grade too. I didn't want anyone else having any kind of role in it. So having these team-based exercises and these small group exercises hopefully gets those skills into them without having it assessed, because they're doing it in class. And then learning from each other. I don't think they know how much they're learning from each other.
Exactly.
And making that really, I'm all for having a lecture right at the beginning that has no content and just outlines, pedagogy has shown us this. This is why I'm doing X, Y, and Z. These are my expectations. And just having a class that outlines how you expect them to learn before then just throwing content at them. Yeah, because that's 25% from your peers. If you ask one of my students how much they learn from their peers, 2-3% maybe, I think they would probably say. Yeah. Anything else? No? Oh, yes, sorry.
A couple of things. I was thinking about people I've worked with over the years and so on. I mean, I know some teachers, lecturers who will not allow or ask questions, but allow questions to be asked in their class because they are terrified of losing control. Or they feel that their responsibility as lecturers is my responsibility to do whatever I can to be the expert. So there's a lot sitting underneath what you're saying about your own beliefs, I guess, about your role or your responsibility as a lecturer. So and then the other thing is, of course, the content. It's very different. So it's essentially, at the end of the day, we need to mix it up. There's a place for all different kinds of teaching within the lecture model that we're given. We're just kind of stuck with it, aren't we?
Yeah, well, I mean, they just keep building more lecture theatres.
Yeah.
There's lecture theatres in the old building, there's lecture theatres in the new buildings. Regardless of what we say we want to teach, they build a lecture theatre. So there's always lecture theatres, and so they're the teaching spaces that are created within universities.
But some of us are better at facilitating that small group. It's a real skill to what you talked about, integrating the small group back into the large group. You have to be able to think on your feet. You're good at it. Some people aren't, and then they know it, and that's why they're so petrified. Because it's a difficult thing to do.
The control bit is hard. I've never, as I see it, lost control. Maybe the students have a different view. Maybe they thought it was chaotic, and I thought, this is all going to plan. So from my perspective, I've never lost control. But I think you have to have a really good understanding of what you're teaching in order to facilitate discussion about it. Because you have to be able to draw out. People could say anything. They can literally say the weirdest thing, and you feel pressure to tie that back into the content somehow. And unless you feel confident that you can do that, you're always going to have this fear that it's going to get out of hand. I completely understand that. I mean, yeah.
And so that's
I'm fairly fearless.
facilitating learning, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's what you are.
Yeah, you become that facilitator in those moments.
Yeah.
And then you pull it back and you do content delivery again, because that's the nature of the space. And students do need some time just to sit back, I think, as well. Or do they? I don't know. Anything else? I realise we're running out of time. No? Oh, thank you very, very much for coming and listening.